Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Entertainment 411. My name is Marvin Karen. I'm your host tonight. Every week, we bring you the people who work in the entertainment industry. Our goal is to shine a spotlight on those who work both in front of and behind the scenes. Today, we are especially honored, privileged, and excited to welcome one of Canada's most esteemed and celebrated actors, from the stages of the Stratford Festival to his unforgettable performances on screen as Pierre Trudeau, from action heroes to features such as Bon Cop, Bad Cop. Colm Feore has an admirable record of accomplishment in the entertainment industry. His body of work has left an indelible mark on Canadian culture and international audiences as well. So, folks, please join me in welcoming the extraordinary Colm Feore. Colm, come and join me.
How are you? Nice to see you.
I am good. Good to see you again, my friend. Thank you so much for doing this. We are really just so honored and pleased to have you with us. A warning, I know the show is advertised to go for an hour, but with Mr. Feore in the house, we're likely to go a little long. He's just that entertaining and that valuable. So maybe Colm will do a Tommy Lee, Sean Penn, a Russell Crowe thing and clam up on us, but not bloody likely. Colm, let's start at the beginning. You were born in Boston, which I remember. You were born in Boston, but raised in Windsor. Anything you want to say about how maybe your Canadian upbringing and your American nationality, because you do have dual citizenship, has impacted your acting career?
Well, I suppose I should be very candid about how much it's helped. I mean, in terms of the evolution, you know, as a person, as an artist, etc., it's a different story. But just in terms of the legalese, my father had the presence of mind. Even though what he was studying in Boston, I was born there. We went back to Ireland. He got his first job in Ottawa, and he had the presence of mind, and an aunt of his who lived in New York City, to maintain my Aunt Amy as my American address and have all my paperwork, Social Security, passports, etc., sent to her. And I would go stay with her. I would go and audition for things, and she would fix my clothes and make sure I didn't look like a bum when I went to the auditions. But the bottom line was that has been an exceptionally useful little bit of greasing the wheels, paperwork wise, and crossing borders, etc. I had thought for the longest time it was because I was so awesome that I could go back and forth to America and all that. And finally, my accountant said, "You idiot! You're also an American. That's why. It has nothing to do with any of the rest of that."
False modesty. False modesty.
No. Then to answer your first question, imagine being born American of Irish parents, going back to Ireland while they found their way in the New World. And when they did, it was Canada, and they were very flexible and open to whatever was going to happen. I was a landed immigrant in Montreal, 1961, 62, something like that. And then down to Windsor. We lived in Ottawa for a little bit, then down to Windsor. And, you know, basically fully and completely Canadian. And my parents thought, how do we do that? We're Irish and we don't understand. This was the era of Trudeau, and it just becoming very much Trudeau. So 61, 62, he was, I think, he might have been Attorney General or the Canadian equivalent. And so they said, why don't we send him to French school? And why don't we learn French? And why don't we do all these things that seems to make sense in Canada? And so thus began what I think were the seeds of a certain kind of personality flexibility. Who are you? Irish, you American, you Canadian? So what do you need? I'll be whatever you want.
Wow.
I think there's something in that.
Yeah. Where did it start? I mean, were you acting in high school plays? I mean, where did the acting bug start?
Strangely enough, much, much earlier. And I don't know why. I mean, maybe it was an Irish household. So there was always music. There was always all the great Irish music, the records of Michael McLeamore and the Clancy brothers and all these guys doing their things. Frank O'Connor reading his own short stories. So there was always that sense. There was also Irish Catholics, right? So there's a lot of us and a fiercely competitive dinner table and vying basically for our parents' attention. You know, Dad had a tough job. He was a radiologist. It was a tough, long job, lives at stake. Things were important. So when he got home, you know, you kind of won a prize if you could make him laugh. You know, so there was a certain amount of competition there, and we all vied very, very hard for that. But strangely enough, even though I went to like a French primary school, I was doing plays in grade 5 and 6, and I hated it. I actually hated it. And the reason I hated it was because, for reasons unknown, probably because I was a large, slightly dumpy kid with curly hair, it was thought that I could be the bloat king in whatever play they were doing. And so inevitably, my part was lounging on some kind of chaise while, you know, 12-year-old girls put their fingers through my hair and fed me grapes. I've never been so mortified. I don't actually know quite how I survived it to get through and become an actor yet, but I thought, well, there's something to this acting thing. So that was primary school. Then I was sent away because my parents were going to say, well, how do we, you know, move ahead in Canada? So he's got a bit of French. Now we send him to an Anglican, like a Protestant school that's establishment. So I went to a place called Ridley College in St. Catharines, which was all of those things, and had a great drama program. And instantly, I mean, grade 7 and 8, the moment I got there, I was dragooned by the Scottish English master, McGregor. Yeah, his name was McGregor. Of course, his name was McGregor. Yeah, he was Scots Jew for a long line of them, probably from Glasgow. And anyway, Jimmy McGregor, can you believe it? He said, you will play Sir Percy C. Huntington Blimp in our little play, and I will teach you to, and he put a coat hanger in my back to make me stand up straight. He gave me a stick under my arm and a peaked cap and said, here are your lines, go and learn those. And that was like my start. And I never looked back. The whole of my career at Ridley, from grade 8 to grade 13, which we had at the time, and Latin courses in grade 13, I was doing plays, house plays, intramural plays, the Simpson Sears Drama Festival. And, you know, our idea of a house play at Ridley with this madman whom you may have known because he was a mentor to Jack Bloom. His name was Victor Bowman, a South African mentor, and he taught me everything. But we were doing plays in high school like Tom Stoppard's Jumpers, the persecution and assassination of Jean-Paul Marat, performed by the inmates of Charenton under the direction of the Marquis de Sade. We did that and toured it around. That was the kind of stuff we were doing. And then at the same time, I was doing Oliver because that was the school play and I was dragooned into doing that. Needless to say, I wasn't a great student. They gave me as a gift in my final year a passing grade in chemistry because my father paid for it. I think he actually paid for it. It was, I think, a 51 or a 52 in chemistry, because what was I taking? 2 Englishes, 2 histories, and chemistry. No. And I applied to various universities thinking I would be a middling history or English teacher if I could ever get through it, but I didn't have enough passion for it. And I also just plain wasn't good enough. And although I was accepted to a couple, I was also accepted to the National Theatre School of Canada because Victor said, you should just apply and audition. I'll drive you to the audition. I'll help you with the work on it. And he did. And
now, National Theatre School of Canada, full disclosure, we met there. I'm glad you're sitting down 47 years ago. It was that long ago.
Look awesome.
Tell me about, I had a great time there. What was your experience there? How did you feel about the training you got there?
Well, in the main, I thought the training was terrific. I think of Pierre Lefebvre, Clifford John Williams, Louis Spritzer, Anne-Marie Peters, a handful of those, Michael Mawson, certainly, and certainly visiting directors and actors, Martha Henrys, etc., and our visits to Stratford where we could interact with all those. At the time, I was, and I'm old enough to be honest with you now, I was not the most welcome there. And the reason for that was I came at a time when Douglas Rain, who's a great Canadian actor, but also was running the theater school when I auditioned for it, was leaving as I was arriving. But I was auditioned by him, and I've seen the notes for my audition. And I know the only reason I got in was because of him. Because I could stand up straight, remember the coat hanger, right. And I could speak clearly because at Ridley we learned speaking in public, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the notes says, he's got to stop saying sir. Yes, sir. No, sir. Well, no, I don't think so, sir, but we'll see. So I got in because of him. Joel Miller, who was the co-artistic director, was going to become the full artistic director. And he was a pretend Marxist, Leninist kind of sympathizer. And needless to say, bougie, quasi-aristocratic bastards like myself should not be accepted to theater schools, and never mind encouraged to go forward in the arts. So we didn't get along all that well.
Yeah. Okay.
I haven't survived. Let me cut to the good part. The good part is John Wood, God rest him, is running the National Arts Center. A couple of his people back out of Henry V, Neil Monroe's Henry V, the genius Neil Monroe, and in a very good production with all kinds of terrific people in it. And a couple of people backed out, 2 to go to LA and whatever, and Ben Campbell to go and do Loot with his dad, Douglas Campbell, in the other smaller theater after they disgorged their duties for Henry V. So John is looking for people. It's the last 5-6 weeks, maybe 2 months of my graduating year. And he calls the theater school and says, I need some people and I need them now. Can you send me who you've got? Now I'm graduating. They don't send me. They don't send me at all. And I'm the person that when somebody who I forget who it was, talked to all of our teachers in the first week that I was there, talked to Pierre Lefebvre and said, what do you make of this first class? Well, so-and-so is going to be temporary. This is going to be kitchen sink. And that one is a classical actor, pointing to me. So needless to say, if there's a show about Henry V and it's Shakespeare, you might start by sending me. They didn't send me. Mm-hmm. They sent 2 second-year guys whose names I will not release because this is a public show. And so John looked at the 2 of them and went, no, they're not ready. They're in second year. What are you talking about? Have you got anybody else? And then they sent these guys, my classmates, the only 2 left, Brian Dooley and Ron Lee.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And they're terrific actors, though not dyed-in-the-wool classical actors in the same vein of, me carrying spears and yo-hee-ho, my lord, dinner is served. And so they go down and John goes, well, they're good, but have you got nobody else? I said, well, not really. We got this one guy. Well, send me the last guy, for God's sake. And so I go down on the bus to Ottawa and pull a page out of the brilliant and iconic R.H. Thompson's book. And I've been lucky enough to work with him at the theater school. He'd come and probably in a show you were in. Yeah. He was playing Theseus in Our Midsummer Night's Dream.
That's right. Yeah.
If memory serves, Henry Tarvani was directing.
Yep.
And I was playing Aegeus, somebody's father. I was probably 19. However, I watched R.H., who would root himself to the event of the rehearsal, and he'd take off his shoes and socks. Sorry, somebody ringing my doorbell. Let me just get rid of them.
No worries.
as I was saying,
Yes, thank God you're back.
Henry Charles, somebody trying to sell me something with a nice vest, I don't know what, and a lanyard. In any event, RH takes off his shoes and socks and roots himself to the ground in the space and allows the dove of inspiration to descend upon him. I thought, this guy's I'm stealing all of this. And so I go to the National Arts Center. I present myself in this cold, empty, drafty rehearsal hall in front of John Wood. I said, do you mind if I take off my shoes, socks, just prepare? And pull a complete RH. I take everything off and I take a couple of deep breaths. I said, yeah. And then, proceed to forget most of my lines, but get through it. He offered me the job in the room.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, this is some kind of balanced vindication for whatever I've been through with them not really thinking, I was peasanty enough to be in the school, blah, blah. So I go back with a job, and I haven't graduated yet. So I'm going to leave before I graduate, come back and get the piece of paper later. Perry Schneiderman, the co-director, artistic director at the time, meets me in the hallway, and I adore Perry. He's a wonderful guy and a fabulous teacher and all of that. But he says to me, hey, listen, can I have a word with you? We've always believed in you. We always thought you had something. And, congratulations. That's good. This is terrific. Good way to start without, actually even finishing school. Could you do me a favor? Could you not say anything bad about the theater school, when you get there? Because we really think you're going to be good and you're going to be fine. And just, because it's a bit of a white elephant in the government, right? So just, shut up. I just thought, okay. And that was my start, as it was.
Colm, we cannot interview you without talking about Stratford and Shakespeare. Mm-hmm. When did you remember your first year there, your first parts there? How did that all start?
I had come to Toronto after the NAC, after the Henry V, which was remarkable. And I watched Neil Monroe from the tunnels every day. Anytime I wasn't doing a piece of the play, I was in the tunnels watching Neil, taking notes, just sucking up, how does one do this? And Neil was a particularly fine example of how a North American actor, in particular a Canadian actor, would approach classical plays and approach Shakespeare. And he just had an absolutely riveting, crystalline intelligence and was able to convey that with the way he spoke the words. So you understood it, but you also kind of got it. There was nothing foreign about it. I thought, there's something in this. So I then went to Toronto looking for work, got a little work at the CBC, luckily, thanks to Michael Mawson. And Ann Tate, who was a casting director at the CBC at the time, 790 Bay Street, if you recall. Mm-hmm. She was dragooned into helping the festival, Stratford Festival, get their act back together after they fired the Gang of Four, hired John Dexter, fired John Dexter, reached out to Johnny Hirsch, who said, I'm still running the Seattle Rep, but I'll do what I can for you. I'll help you. I ran it with, Gasco in 67. That was a bad idea. So we split up, and I'm happy to come back and do it alone. But I'm going to need to bring some of my people. And they said, whatever you want to do. So Anne, who had been his casting director when he ran the CBC drama stuff, he said to her, find me some people. For those of you who don't know, John was 6.5 feet tall, Hungarian and wild in his gesture, his ideas, his articulation, everything, and magnificent. I adored him. And as it turns out, he was very kind to me. He hired me. But what Anne did, she called me and said, look, there's callback auditions for Stratford. You've missed the initial auditions for Stratford. There's callback auditions at a church on Yonge Street, and here's the cross street. Present yourself at the back door on this day, knock 3 times. I will have 2 pieces, contrasting pieces, ready, and I will let you in and find a moment where John could see you. And So true to her word, she did all that. I showed up. I was ready with something. First of them was Romeo and Juliet. I only got 3 lines into it before he stopped me. And another 3 lines. No, do it again. Let's start again. No, sorry. No, you're not listening. Start again. And I got maybe 10 lines into the whole experience, but had an experience of auditioning for somebody who kept trying to get me to be better.
Mm.
And then he called me and offered me a job.
Wow.
And that started my Stratford journey. And so just to give you the first year, I was offered the page in the Taming of the Shrew, because we were going to do the play within the play. So there's a page who is a boy, but dresses up as a girl to convince a drunken lord that he's a marvelous guy and he's got a lovely wife, etc. And he said, you'll be in drag the whole time. It'll be fabulous. You'll enjoy it. And that was great. But because of all of the madness that was Gang of Four, John Dexter, everything falling apart, equity protesting, people saying I'm never working there again, people saying I only want to work there. It was a mess. And so consequently, there were a lot of other parts that went unfilled. And before you know it, I was being asked if I would consider playing Tranio, the second male lead after Petruchio, with Len Cariou as Petruchio and Sherry Flett as her ladyship. And I said, well, I didn't know enough to say no. I said, well, of course. And so I was Tranio suddenly instead of the page, which would have been much less work. I was in Coriolanus, Comedy of Errors, and The Misanthrope, directed by Jean Gascon.
Oh, wow.
Who had in 1967 run the theater with her. So all of these guys, I mean, it was extraordinary. I've worked for every artistic director for Stratford except for Tony Guthrie, who had stopped doing that before I was born. So that was my first year.
We really want to keep the focus on you, but if we can just go down a side alley for just a second.
Please do.
You've been so generous to Shakespeare's Performing Arts, a charitable nonprofit, and so you know from your experience with that organization that Shakespeare's on the bubble. He's regarded as too hard for kids today. The question is, what does an old, white, dead British playwright have to say to a young, modern, diverse Canadian audience? How would you feel, Colm, if Shakespeare were to be removed from the map? I, for one, think it would be horrible, but I want to get your take on that.
I would simply never stop doing it.
Yeah.
I would keep doing it. And most of how I keep doing it is I do it out loud. I do it out loud in the streets. I do it out loud here, there, and everywhere. Billy Bob Thornton, with whom I've worked on this recent show, Landman, actually mocks me wholesale because not too long ago, a few weeks ago, when we were shooting in Texas, we were on the street. Imagine this picture, me, Sam Elliott, and Billy Bob Thornton, all of us clutching a beer, talking to some good old boys outside of a bar in Medicine Wells, Texas. Okay? We're kind of out there. And the bar was part of the hotel, and there's nowhere else to go, and it was late, so we just sit now, we're having a drink. We're standing out there on the street. And one of these guys says something, well, no, that's kind of like Shakespeare. And my ears perk up. And Billy goes, oh, you shouldn't have done that. Shakespeare? Did you say Shakespeare? And so I turned to this guy and his eyes, I said, well, you're so right. That's a bit like Hamlet, when he says this, or Romeo when he says that, not to mention Macbeth, but we can't say that, but he says this here and this. Now, let me tell you, and this poor guy, I mean, he's enormous. He's got a big clutch of beer, the other fellow the same. And Billy is just watching me. And I launch in to a 45-minute diatribe with selections from of every Shakespeare thing that comes to my head. The first half of Julius Caesar playing both parts, Cassius Brutus, you name it. And so forever after, Billy has said, you ever seen this guy? Don't ask him about Shakespeare because it's going to go all horribly wrong here. But they're these good old boys, and their ears were wide, their eyes were spinning. They were kind of going, I think I understand that. And that was the moment where I thought, you know what? This is never going to die. Yeah. But what we need are people who are willing to get out there and send the message. I'm recently getting, like yesterday, I start getting an Instagram post, and I follow it to creep my kids. I'm not a techie person, but there's a new gal out there, and I wanted to recommend her to you. Don't know her name, but her handle is Shakespeare Made Clear. Oh, okay. And she just pops up. She's got flaming red hair and bright eyes and a really engaged enthusiasm let me explain this. You think Shakespeare's hard? It's not hard. Let me tell you. What about this? What about this? Do you know why you speak English that way? Because of this. And so I thought, well, this isn't dead yet. If it's coming up on my Instagram today, I mean, maybe it overheard me speaking Shakespeare while I was doing the dishes, because that's another thing I do. But more importantly, rather more seriously, if we are thinking about studying acting, if you're thinking about being an actor, you need exercises. Like Yo-Yo Ma needs Bach, right? You need to be able to do the scales. What are the scales? The scales, God love them, aren't David Mamet. Not even David Rabe. They're not even Eugene O'Neill or Miller. It's Shakespeare. And it's the rigor of Shakespeare, both in prose and poetry, that gives us the skills in practice to apply to absolutely everything else we do. And I tell you, I use everything I've learned doing Shakespeare and everything I learned at theater school 47, as you say, years ago. I use that stuff every single day doing television and film. So, well, how does it work there? I said, it works because I need to understand what I'm saying. I need to know what the lines are. I need to have given it some thought to how it might feel. I need to have an imaginative investment in all this, but I also have to remain facile and flexible depending what a director wants, or the situation wants, or the weather wants, or the cameraman wants. And so I can think of 1,000 reasons why Shakespeare is valid and necessary and deserves our study and respect.
Agreed. Let's come back to you now and your career, and it's a nice segue, because talk a little bit about transitioning between classical theaters, Shakespeare, and modern roles like London and Umbrella Academy. How tell us about that process. Do you have a process, or how does that all work? How do you go from one to the other?
I discovered rather early on, and keep in mind, I was surrounded by remarkable people here. Brian Bedford, Len Cariou, Martha Henry, and great directors, Michael Langham, David William, Robin Phillips, Johnny Hirsch, everybody. James Benedick, one of the great members of the company, who had gone out and done all of this legwork before me, gone to New York and LA and Toronto and wherever, looking for the jobs in television and film, doing a bit of theater, touring around. And, I would happily sit at their knee or elbow, buy them a drink and say, so how does this work? What do you do? And Cariou particularly was interesting, because Len had been trained here in Stratford, started singing and doing all his stuff in Winnipeg. Johnny Hirsch spotted him there because that's where Johnny started his theatrical career with Tom Hendry. And then he would call him and say, Len, I need you. Forget Broadway. Thank you. You've won the Tony. You've done all that. Come, I need you in Stratford. It's a dire year. You need to play Taming of the Shrew. You need to play Coriolanus. And if you can give me 2 years, we might get this place back on its feet again. And Len said, okay. But that had been Len's mantra always. Len was doing Sondheim on Broadway, winning Tony Awards for Sweeney Todd, doing a little night music, working with everybody cool. And then when Minneapolis called the Guthrie, which is a theater very like Stratford, and said, can you come and do some Shakespeare? He went, absolutely, I'll be right there. And everybody in New York said, no, dude, you can't do that. You can't do it. He said, I can do that. And I'll fly back to be here for you when you need it. But in the meantime, I need to recharge these batteries. I need to really practice my scales. I need to be ready for whatever happens. And I'm not going to be ready if I'm just sitting here in Manhattan waiting for you to ask me to work. And so I got all of this, as mother's milk from him. And he was extremely generous with, like, this worked, this didn't work. Sometimes it's tough. He said, I've had trouble breaking into film and television. Not so now. You've seen True Bloods right now. He's done that for 50 years and is retiring in comfort. Just won the Order of Canada. Fantastic and timely, just about time too. But these guys had an enormous amount to say that was very effective for me, hearing it, thinking, this is foundational. What I do here now will make me ready for anything. And Benedick said something that I've never forgotten. Because I said, well, do I go to LA now? Do I go to New York? How do I break? I don't know if I've got anything to show. They don't know Stratford exists, even though it's the biggest theater in North America and certainly the largest repertory company in North America. It's got a huge reputation, but they don't care. He said, don't go to the party till you're invited.
Mm.
And so I then sought ways to be invited, and that dovetailed from Stratford into a cinema career that when one of those movies came out on VHS tape, I thought, I'll go now. I'll take this tape to LA and to New York. I said, hey, I'm in this. And I've got all this classical acting stuff as well, but I'm in this. Did you want to see it?
What were those early parts, and what was on what stuff was on that tape?
Well, no, it was just one movie.
Oh, one movie. What movie?
32 short films about Glenn Gould,
of course.
Which I have to say, and this is going to seem completely disingenuous, but really right in front of me against this wall with all these photographs on it and a box that came in the mail a little while ago. I'm happy to report that 32 short films about Glenn Gould has just made the Criterion Collection.
Excellent.
And that's a huge thing. I have nothing but Criterion Collection movies in a stack, most of them still in plastic, that I think in my retirement I will watch. It's all of, Godard and Kurosawa and everything else. And now we're there too. And as it happens, this was the thing. This was a succès d'estime. That is to say, everybody talked about it, but nobody saw it. They thought it was fantastic. It did the Venice Film Festival, played in Rome. Another poster I have over here, it says 32 brevi film. You see, it's just over there, that yellow poster on the wall. Juan Kioran, my dear friend and an actor pal, stole that off a telephone pole in Rome when he was on holiday there because the film was playing in Rome at some grand little salon. And he said, I know that guy, and brought it back for me. And so that became my calling card. I went and I used it to open the door in New York with Sidney Lumet. And Sidney Lumet got me into other doors. My gosh, God rest him, Robert Redford. Robert Redford asked me to audition for a movie that he was doing that Sam Neill, the Australian actor, was holding out for too much money for. So Sam was sitting in Australia going, I want millions of dollars or whatever he wanted. And so they said, well, we're not going to do that. Let's ask a bunch of other actors to sign a contract before they get on a plane saying they will do it for X if we want them. And we come. And I flew into somewhere in New England where he and a very young Scarlett Johansson and Kristen Scott Thomas were getting ready to film The Horse Whisperer. And sitting in his trailer in the middle of the woods, Bob Redford spent most of his time telling me why he had programmed 32 short films about Glenn Gould 3 times at the Sundance Film Festival because he liked it so much. And all of that. In the end, I didn't get to do the film. I did get to kiss Kristen Scott Thomas in rehearsal. I will cherish that always. But he was so gracious and so charming. And again, there was this movie that was my entree. And then I went to LA with the same thing. And people, the producers, directors who I was getting to meet, I had no business meeting them, but they hadn't seen it, but their secretaries had seen it. So, I made that mistake and I learned pretty quickly. I said, well, which one of the films did you like best? And he had no idea, right? And he said, I have it on laser disc. And he had the poster in the office, and he'd never seen it. But his secretary told him, oh no, it's really cool. I've seen it. It's great. And so consequently, that got me into all kinds of places I really shouldn't have been. And it kickstarted something that the Stratford and my theatrical background was a very good foundation for. And I then learned, and I have this wacky theory, and I am the living embodiment of it. If anybody wants to, come and quiz me on it. It is my feeling that the Stratford Festival, their main festival theater, which is a thrust, that is to say, there's when I started, there were 2,272 seats in it. Now there's 1,850 because people have bigger bums. So they've renovated it and they've made it a little more comfortable and changed the geometry of it, not to my liking, but another story. But you're alone on a thrust stage about this size in front of nearly 2,000 people. And as Michael Mawson said, you better figure out what your entertainment value is, because there's a very expensive full house of people, if you're lucky, waiting to hear what you have to say. And what I discovered very early on was that stage is remarkably cinematic. That is to say, if you're standing alone on this stage, and it's a thrust, so for your audience, understand the audience is behind me. It's about 210 degrees. Now it's a little closer to 190, but it used to be 210 degrees. So you're having to look at something, and no seat is further than 62 feet away from the stage. So they're very close, and the acoustics are immaculate if you know what you're doing. So physically, there you are. You have no set to speak of because there are no fly floors. It's just a thrust. You walk out onto the stage, they turn on a light, you talk. That's it. And so you suddenly understand, I need my body. I need my voice. I need every expressive tool I have to tell the story I want to tell. And I suddenly realized, which means, A, you've got to train. You've got to keep your body fit. You've got to keep your voice doing its thing. You've got to maintain all that and get all the help you can. Luckily, at a place like Stratford, they offer you a lot of that help. But you then have to say, well, wait a minute. When the curtain goes up, there's no curtain. When you walk on stage and you present yourself, you say, I'm responsible for telling the audience, this is the wide shot. It's a big physical thing, and I can include everybody in the wide shot. And then if the scene requires, I said, well, this is the medium shot. This is a 2-shot. This is just you and me talking. And then suddenly you stop everything, and it's just to be or not to be. And there's nothing moving but my lips, and you can still hear everything I say. It's an extraordinarily powerful place to be. And I've had the great privilege of playing all of the best parts in the English language on that stage in front of those people, trying to work that out. But what I discovered, as I said, is cinematic. The only difference between a 2,000-seat auditorium and a 200-millimeter lens is technical. You just need to know what you're doing for each of those things. So I started to pick up cameras. A lot of lenses, looking through, framing. What am I telling? What's the story? Where is it? What's going on? What am I saying when I don't have anything to hide behind? And how much more responsible am I alone out here in front of an audience? And how much of that responsibility do I give up or happily am relieved of when you say action and the camera rolls? It's a fascinating study.
So that's the difference between acting on stage and acting on camera, such as it is. And you've been very, very articulate about that. Let's look at another parallel. The difference between, and I'd be really curious to hear what you have to say about this, because I've got my thoughts on the subject, but the differences between working in the States and Canada.
One addendum I will add to that last pitch about this particular cinematic experience of the Stratford Festival and lenses, et cetera. The kernel of truth that you discover in rehearsal and in your study about what you're playing, what you're acting, is always the same, right? How you express it is merely technical, and you can master that. So cut to the difference between working in Canada and the States. The differences are considerable. In my experience, I've found that, in Canada, we tend to cleave to the British model. That is to say, all of our theatrical history is essentially English. And all of our behaviors are English. But our friends and our close colleagues to the South have this method acting thing that is raw and rugged and very attractive. And I think that Canadian actors have, over the course of time, been very well placed to accept and admire the English tradition, steal everything we can from that, so that we're not the least bit fussed about repetition, consistency, being able to do the same thing 20 times, 100 times, 150 times, and with variations should the director or the other actors require whatever we need to do. But we're also very attracted to the raw, absolutely centered, emotional experience of the kind of acting that the very best representatives of that genre do in the States. And so I've felt that we were best placed to have this kind of blend of the raw and the polished, nuanced, technical, and yet I can give all this up. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know how to repeat it if it does. And I know how to take notes and pay attention. And I know when it's working and when it's not. And so I've always found that we throw ourselves into rehearsals with that kind of, searching for an American abandon, with a kind of very British, yes, but let's make some notes. Let's be sure that we have that right. And that has given us something very, very useful in terms of our higher ability. The other thing that is slightly more problematic, in America, the distinctions are slightly clearer. They're more siloed. In Canada, there's no money in any of the stuff that we do. So we are forced, but if you want to make a living, to know how to do radio, television, film, and theater, and Lord knows whatever else, often in the same week or month, because that's the only way to make a living. In America, and it's changing a little bit now, but there are theater actors, television actors, and cinema actors, and they don't cross-pollinate much. Now of late, because most of the best scripts, the best writers move to television or streamers, that's slightly not true anymore. So you'll find the biggest stars in the world are doing television, and Netflix is taking over. So what you thought was a TV show is in fact a movie. It'll be in the theaters, but it's on your screens. You're streaming it, who knows? But there are those kind of siloed differences that I think many of my American colleagues find it rather difficult to break through. There are brilliant actors in the States you've never heard of, and they've been doing Shakespeare in Minneapolis, San Diego, Oregon, and never getting the chance to shine in New York, right? So who's in the Othello in New York with Jake Gyllenhaal and Denzel? Well, it's people who are willing to stay in New York and wait for the job that says, I'm going to be with Denzel and Jake Gyllenhaal. How good are you at Shakespeare? I've done a couple. Okay, would it be better if you'd done a few more than a couple? But and I had done Julius Caesar with Denzel years and years ago, and there were a handful of us that had what I would consider enough experience in Shakespeare to play it at that level. But then that turns out it wasn't what that was about. It was about having Denzel Washington willing to play Brutus in Julius Caesar, and we sold out.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference, and there's a whole attitude difference. There's a difference from the producers. There's a difference in the way they treat us, and the way they pay us, and the way they see us. I will confess to having used my split personality citizenship as a tool to some, I hope, advantage. I am only represented in the United States. If you want something in Canada, I have a voice gal here who's terrific, but that never happens. Very rarely do we do anything. I haven't been represented here for years. So if you want to work with me, you phone LA or Texas, and then we'll talk. That, I have to say, I'm embarrassed to say, I think changes the dynamic.
Someone who will go nameless, but a very successful Canadian actor, woman who has done a lot of stuff. Many, many years ago, I was out, and she'd won an award. I can't remember what they were called. It's a Gemini. She'd won a Gemini for something. And this was 2 years after that. And I said, like, you seem to have some momentum going with the movie career. Didn't you want to pursue that? And she said, no, I feel most at home on stage. That's where I want to be.
Wow.
You seem to bounce back and forth very, very comfortably. And I'm just wondering, what I mean, did you get bored in one or the other, or you're excited by both? Just talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Of course, the first thing I did out of school, out of a few little television and film things in Toronto, immediately out of school and after the National Arts Centre, Henry V, I ended up at Stratford. Very happily, very luckily. And I had a very long run here until from 81, about 89, which was an enormously useful foundation. Then got a little bit of a taste of television and film again, came back here and was doing, I think, Romeo and Juliet, playing Mercutio. And Francois Girard was looking for a guy to play Glenn Gould in 32 short films about Glenn Gould, and it scoured the countries, interviewed all kinds of people, and came and saw me do Mercutio. I died at the end of the first act, so we went to dinner in the second act because, there's no need to hang around. And bottom line, we did the movie, and the movie did very well as a Criterion Collection now. At the end of it, he said, listen, you should do more of this. You're not bad, and you could work on this, but you need to be available, which of course is, it's basically code for unemployed. And I had obligations at the time. I said, well, how long do I need to be available to give this a shot? He said, 2 years. I said, dude, you don't understand. That simply cannot happen. And yet there was the coincidence of the month that the 32 short films was being released on VHS, which was huge at the time. I was offered a Stratford season. I was newly married. We were pregnant. It was stupid. And I turned Stratford down and said, I'm going to go take a chance. I'm going to fly to New York with this box of film. I'm going to fly to LA. I'm going to give it to whoever I can and say, what do you think? And before you knew it, I was in with Sidney Lumet. Sidney hired me. Sidney then says, oh, you got an audition for Milos Forman around the corner at his place. Oh, send Milos my love. And suddenly you're places you don't belong, but playing catch up because you think, look, I've got experience in the state. I know what the beats, I know what they want. I can figure the cameras out. We'll keep going. And then you do that for a while. And you play all manner of things trying to earn your stripes. I said no to nothing. And my wife was very understanding and agreeable. She'd come with, the kids would come. We'd do whatever we thought made sense to build what was laughably thought of as a career. And then, of course, you think, I miss that stuff. And it's time to play that guy. Or time to, or somebody would call and say, hey, if you're not doing any of this other stuff, would you consider doing that? And then I would very tentatively introduce the idea to my managers and agents to say, how would you guys feel if X? Because when I first went to Los Angeles, I took all of the Shakespeare and all the classic drama off my resume because it was frightening. And they could use the theatrical stick to beat me with.
Yeah.
Right. So I said, well, I'm just an actor. I've got some experience. And if you want to know what, well, we can talk about that. But here's 32 short films about Glenn Gould. Here's this and this. And I'm prepared to do whatever you want. And I got very lucky. John Woo hired me for Face Off. Brad Silberling hired me for City of Angels, back to back. So and I was always, this is another sort of secret, I never lived in LA. I always pretended that I was about to live in LA. And the reason I never lived in LA was because my wife, Donna, is a brilliant director and choreographer, and she had a perfectly good career here. We were also having children. And so I wasn't going to stick her in Pasadena while I got, Baywatch as the lawyer who, whatever, because I used to get a lot of lawyers. I still get a lot of lawyers. And so whenever I was there, I'd be going down, shaking hands and saying, are you here? I'm about to come. The thing is, my wife's just got a show in Canada. So we're going to wait till that happens, but I'm coming back. I'll be here all the time. Absolutely. I'll be here. And the one time Donna got me an apartment in LA, in Venice, I was hired to do season 7 of 24, in the middle of which, well, halfway through episode 9, they went on strike, the writers and producers. And I had to give up my apartment and come home. I was also doing a Clint Eastwood movie at the same time, but they had already bought their script, so we could finish that. And so it was never a happy experience. So I was always doing what I call surgical strikes. Shake some hands, get a job, hopefully leave with one, and create the illusion. Because of course these things take forever to come out, right? So if you do 3 or 4 movies in a year, they will trickle out in January, May, July, October of the following year, and you'll look like you're crazy busy. In the meantime, you can go back home to Canada and do Sensitive Skin and whatever. And 24, to be very, frank, they paid reasonably well, and they subsidized a bunch of stuff that I wouldn't have been able to afford to do here in Canada, that I was only too happy to do because I was using their money to pay for it. And so that's how I balance things. And then in the little windows of maybe this could be a thing, Stratford would call and say, do you want to play Macbeth? Do you want to play Cyrano? Do you want to play Lear? Well, of course I do. How can we work that out? And so occasionally I would go to managements of shows that I was doing if they were long running and I had a contract. I said, I know we haven't shot a minute or a frame of the second season of this show, but can I talk to you about season 3? And the guy looks at me funny. And he said, I said, no, listen, let me make this clear to you. You guys take 6 months to shoot. You take 6 months to put it together. You take 3 months to figure when algorithmically brilliant day to release it, when the new moon and the biodiversity, whatever you've planted in the ground says it's the right time. And then you call us to say, hey, we'd like to do another season, but you don't pay us in the meantime. We just got contracts. Stratford wants me to do Richard III and the Miser, the Molière. What do you think? And very gracious, Steve Blackman, our producer, writer, boss, said, I think we could work something out. We'll talk. And so I said to Cymbeline here, the artistic director, I said, listen, if they call, I have to leave. But I'm betting that they won't. And indeed, when we did it for COVID, then everything shut down. Then we went back to filming. When they went back to do Richard III again, I went back to the Umbrella Academy people and said, so where are we at here? We don't know. We'll call you. I did an entire festival season from Valentine's Day to Halloween. And 2 days after Halloween, they called, hey, we'd like to do season 4. For God's sakes. And that's the risk you take, right? You just sort of, but the reason I do this stuff and the reason I feel it's necessary is that it makes you a better artist. It makes you stronger. You're working out these muscles. I mean, Shakespeare is hard, rewarding, but hard. And that's why I only want to do it. I want to keep dropping by. I wouldn't want to do another sort of 5 years in a row of Shakespeare, 6 days a week, O'Neill and, Miller, whoever. I would find that enormously difficult. But surgically, the right time, the right thing. And so I managed to get through the entire year of Richard III and the Miser. And I made it through. I got to the end. I had a trainer. I had lots of coaching. I had lots of help. But I felt at the end of it, I've reminded myself what I learn here, what I find useful here, how I love engaging with the audience live. I mean, they're right there in front of you. They are only like a foot away. You can smell them and they can smell you, and you just try not to spit on them. But that has always been my life. That's where I trained young. As I said, I was 19 or 20 when I first got here, and I'm a lot older than that now, and have been doing basically nothing else since.
We've talked about classical theater and modern theater. We've talked about America and Canada. I've known you long enough, and I know you're going to take this the right way. You're a very successful actor, probably one of the most successful in the history of Canada. But I mean, you can live a life. I mean, like you and I were in a subway in December last year, and you weren't mobbed, whereas like George Clooney, Brad Pitt, they couldn't go on the subway. And I'm just wondering, are you ever in situations where, oh my God, it's the guy from the Umbrella Factory, and how do you deal with that? How do you?
So I'll tell you 2 stories about this that happened recently. We have an apartment in Toronto. Well, there's an apartment the kids had in Toronto, and we've kept it, and we occasionally go and see plays and do stuff. And so I'm coming down from whatever floor it is, and there's 2 people on the elevator, a guy and a young woman. And the guy looks at me and he says, whoa, you look an awful lot like Colm Feore. And I was, first of all, tickled pink that he got the name right. And then, and the woman says, who's Colm Feore? And I thought it'd be helpful. So I said, oh, well, he's a Canadian actor. And your man beside me says, and a really good one. A really good one. I went, well, yeah, I get. Well, what has he done? She said, well, I don't know if you've seen, but the latest thing is a thing called Landman with Billy Bob Thornton. It was like #1 in the world or something. And also, he did this thing called the Umbrella Academy. She said, oh, I watched all that. It's amazing. I said, well, he plays the dad in that. Oh my God, that's amazing. And the door, we hit the ground, the door opens, and the guy turns, he goes, you actually are Colm Feore, aren't you? And I went, well, yeah. And the woman said, what? Who's Colm Feore? And the doors closed. I went to the basement, collected the car, and left, right? Because I thought, this is the Canadian actor's life. You just have to go, no, you don't recognize it. I had a monocle, I had a mustache, I had a beard, I had a wig, hats, you name it. The trouble with Landman is I don't have anything, and I just look like me. So I'm in a restaurant. I mean, this is a bougie as hell story, but I'm in a very nice restaurant in Majorca a couple of weeks ago. And we're treating ourselves to the fact that we got our daughter back to school in Ireland. And, I finished season 2 of Landman. So there we are. And there's a table in front of us full of wonderful people speaking Spanish, but it turns out they're Americans. And at the end of their meal, the woman gets up, she comes over and says, excuse me, I don't mean to bother you, but are you that guy? I know I'm terribly sorry. I'm not sure what you. No, tell me, are you that guy? She said, I'm never right about these things. I'm very often wrong, but I bet my wife that you were that guy. And I wanted, and I said, I'm that guy. I have no idea what guy she's talking about. I have no idea what guy she needed. I just thought, you know what? We can help this ladies' night out if I'm that guy. And, listen, and then I get into the elevator back at the hotel, and a Scotsman says, really looking forward to the second season of Landman. You were great in the first one. Well done. That's great. What? You're watching Land? So for me, it's this wonderful kind of absolutely, anonymity, which is very helpful, and I'm allowed to be protected. But I will confess, without being coy, I always assume somebody's going to figure it out, because people look at me like in a hotel, if we're there for a few days, or we're on a train, or you're on a boat, or you're on a plane, and on Air Canada right now, Bon Cop, Bad Cop, and Landman are playing on the screens, and then French movies I've done like Les Hommes de ma Mère, and so etc. It would be hard not to go, man, isn't that the guy sitting right there? And so what I assume is that sooner or later, somebody who's looking at me thinking we went to school together is going to go, oh no, I just watched him last night in this other thing. So I'm always selling a ticket. I'm always polite. I'm always friendly. I always take people's hand luggage down first and stand blocking the people behind so that they can leave effectively. C'est efficace. And I think there's a certain amount of responsibility. We are public facing, even if they don't even know who we are, because sooner or later, they'll find out.
I think we have by the way, I hope there be an opportunity for anybody who's watching to ask some questions shortly. I suspect that a lot of people watching are young actors who are just maybe at a theater school, or a year or 2 or 5 or even 10 years into the business. And how do they have a career like Colm Feore's? Any advice on that score?
Wow. Listen, I will not be, I won't pretend that it isn't really, really hard. And I won't pretend that it's not really, really hard actually right now. There are a whole bunch of elements that conspire to make the business very difficult now. It costs an awful lot of money to do. Even if you're doing theater, you've got to find somebody to put up the money to get you a space, to pay off your company and your designers and everybody else. If you're doing film and television, you have to have already made arrangements with people to distribute, to get the word out, to publicize, etc. And the biggest problem at the moment is that money costs money. So all of the big guys, Netflix, Amazon, Hulu, Crave, Apple, they are reluctant to borrow the sums of money required to make the tentpole big shows that were being made in Vancouver, Montreal, and Toronto, just without question, absolutely regularly all year round, up until very recently, because they don't want to pay the interest on $100 million loans. So that leaves us with Canadian content and Canadian financed work that is threadbare by comparison. There's just not enough money in it because we don't have the big enough audience. We've only got 40 million people. They don't all have a TV. They're not streaming the same things. And so all the streamers, everybody's trying to make shows for less and less money. And we're being asked to accept less and less money, less time, less everything. And it's become very, very difficult. And so the kind of flexibility that I was talking about earlier with Canadian actors having to do voice work, which is drying up as well because AI and non-union stuff are taking, first place and second place in that to those of us who are old enough to be unionized. And they're just cheaper and they're undercutting us all over the place. Then producers are cutting back. We'll put fewer characters in. We'll cut the locations. We'll do whatever we can to continue, creating our vision, but we're not going to be employing the numbers of people. So consequently, for our audience, how do you get experience? How do you get better at this? Because of course, the doing it is how this is going to work, right? I'm just turning that off. And bottom line, we have to keep doing it amongst ourselves. And there's a lot of that happening here where I live in Stratford. People get together and read plays. They're doing little movies, on their phones. Yeah. They're writing their own things. They're generating their own work. And there is an avenue, and I'm not particularly familiar with how it works, but I have worked for the young people who are doing that, where you can just make it and get it out there. Make it and stream, and so that you have something to show bigger producers, bigger backers, people with a little money for your next big thing. And so I always say yes to working with anybody if they've got money or no money at all, and hope that I've managed to make enough doing something else during the year that will subsidize that. And so far that's worked out. But there's not a lot to be, I have to say, wildly enthusiastic about. I think self-generated and amongst your friends and colleagues generated work is going to be the biggest or the best avenue toward getting better and then having something to show.
Ira Levy, I don't know if you've ever worked with Breakthrough Films and Television. I think you did. Didn't you work with Breakthrough? Peter Williamson and I remember getting out of theater school and sitting down with Ira, who we go back even further than you and I met him when I was 11, 12 years old. Anyway, got out of theater school. And Ira said pretty much what you're saying. He said, don't hang around, create your own work. And, I wish I had no idea what he was talking about. And that's why.
I mean, I wish I could say that there was this huge slush fund of money that somebody with that money is just waiting for creatives to say, I've got a script, I've got some friends, we got cameras, we can make this, and we'll just deliver it to you. We can give you 5 episodes, 10 episodes, whatever you want. You want a 5-minute film, you want a 10, you want a 30-minute, we'll figure it out, and it'll be timely, and it will be, absolutely up to the current moment juste of what's going on in the world. And it'll be played by all of us. And we have that experience, we have that raw stuff and commitment to it. but that money just isn't there. And there is some, but you have to be, a genius at writing grants and figuring out where it is. Is it Telefilm? Is it the Ontario Film Development Corporation? Is it CBC? Who's going to give you, Rogers? Who's going to give you a little money to just do something to prove yourself with? And in the meantime, so that all is not despair, just getting together and practicing with each other, reading, talking about technique, talking about equipment, figuring out who's doing the stuff that you like, where are the films that you like, what did they cost, can you do this for free?
Taking classes to developing your craft.
You really, taking classes is huge. First of all, because you realize you're not alone, right? And everybody there, you're going to meet somebody who's going to go, oh my God, I've been doing this the whole time and I've been suffering. And I was, one of my mantras of late, a couple of years back, but we've had COVID and we've had all these other things, but Megan Follows is a fantastic Canadian actress who's moving into directing. And I had made a point of saying, if a young woman director asks me to do anything, I say yes. No matter what she wants, doesn't what it matter what the fee is, it doesn't matter, because you need a bad guy in your show, old bald white guy. Okay, I'll show up. I'll do that for you, and for free. And so I, basically put my name into various hats, and I did Sugar Daddy for Kelly McCormick, which was fabulous. Then I bumped into Megan here at Stratford, and I said, I hear you're directing. If ever you have any use for me, you give me a call. Well, famous last words, right? So I get a call. She's doing one of her first films, a thriller, in Hamilton for $1.50. I'll take your $1.50. I'll be in Hamilton. Then we get into COVID. Nobody's working at all. It's all terrible. And there's somebody who did 24 with me who says, I'm shooting a movie in Bayfield, which is about 45 minutes from my house. Do you want to be in it? We wanted you earlier in the year, but you were doing Richard III. Now, clearly you're not, because it's COVID, but we figured out a way to make a movie. Come on. Well, I'll be right there. And I meet this lovely young woman named Laura Vandervoort who says, oh, we were supposed to work together. I said, well, I'm sorry, we've never met. I don't know you. She said, well, I was actually the lead in Megan Follows movie, but because your schedule wouldn't allow it, I got replaced. Now I'm mortified, right? Now I'm completely embarrassed. I'm so sorry. Follow my logic. What I had said to Megan is that you don't have any money. So the only currency you have to offer me is time. Here's the time I'm prepared to give you. And that knocked Laura out. So I said, oh, Laura, I am so sorry. I mean, if there's ever anything I can do to help, funny you should mention it. I'm doing my first short film in Hamilton, and I've got 2 parts for you to play for $1.50. So down I go to Hamilton again and do Laura's film, which goes on and plays festivals all over the place, and we won awards. And, so I'm committed to doing that kind of stuff because that's the kind of thing that will keep this industry and our young industry alive and vibrant. And hopefully we'll all be sort of learning from each other.
So that kind of leads nicely into this question. And you've sort of already answered it, but just if you want to extrapolate, if you had a magic wand, if you were omnipotent and all powerful, how would you like to see the Canadian entertainment industry change in the next 5 and the next 10 years?
Wow. I suppose the real wish for our industry would that it became slightly more self-sustaining. And by that, I mean that Canadian audiences longed and loved seeing Canadian stories, or at least stories produced by Canadians. They don't have to be Canadians. They don't have to be maple syrup. They don't have to be beavers. They don't have to be canoes. But there's a sensibility that we have. And there's a nature, the things in our photography, the landscape. There's something about that that speaks to who we are. And there is that material out there. There are young people doing this work now. And, I work with Real Canada and Jack Bloom and Sharon Clark, getting this out to high schools, to National Canadian Film Day, New Canadians, ESL. We have all of that outreach, getting Canadian stories. But it's hard work. And it's a bit of an uphill battle. I could wish that instead of, waiting annually for a National Canadian Film Day, people would where's the Canadian streamer? Is it CBC Gem? Is it something on Rogers? Is it CPAC? Who is it that's got, hey, those are my people. These are my stories. I want and need to see this. And I could wish that we had more of that, and that somehow we could create more of a gloss about it. We've always talked about star systems and the fact that we simply don't have one. All of our stars are in America and they're named Ryan or something like that, right? So it's difficult to generate, homegrown Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver people who are producing this stuff that we can fill a cinema with, or get somebody to commit to watching us at 9:00 on such and such a TV screen or streamer, et cetera, et cetera. So in a perfect world, I would hope that people would take the legacy of the Cronenbergs and the Agoyans, et cetera, and just say, hey, we've got the stuff. We've got the people. We just need to tune in.
You mentioned Victor Bowman. You mentioned Michael Mawson. Anybody, R.H. Thompson, sort of peripherally. Who else has been, would you say, has served as a mentor to Colm?
Oh, well, listen, I've been extraordinarily lucky. And I say that with all humility. Because you described very accurately and generously my bouncing from theater to television to film and I do narrations and documentaries and commercial and read books on tape. There is nothing I will not do for $1, because I've got kids and they depend on me, etc. But it means that I have a series of people who've been enormously influential in different areas. So Michael Langham, David Williams, Johnny Hirsch, all of those people in the theater who are artistic directors here who hired me and believed in me even when I was terrible. And mostly they would say things like, why are you terrible? You need to do this. I said, will you tell me what I need to do? Well, you need to go and talk to this voice person and that physical person and this person and fence better or whatever. I said, okay, fine. But then you flip. And now I'm sitting down with Clint Eastwood, Michael Mann, John Woo, Sidney Lumet. The mind boggles. Never mind François Girard, Jean-Jacques Hano, etc., etc. And so all of these people and every cinematographer that those guys had, who were enormously influential in my understanding how to go from a theatrical background to cinematic expression, remarkably helpful. Donald Britton, the great Canadian documentarian of NFB fame, my first drama for CBC was for him. I was a child. And, you learn quickly on these sets, because I bumped into him at like 7:00 in the morning on the craft service truck. And he's clutching his coffee. And I said, Mr. Britton, good morning. Are you okay? Yeah, I am. Have you seen anybody here who's drunk? I said, no, sir, not yet. Why? Well, that's a son of a bitch who's got my coffee. And I thought, what? Oh, shit. So, you learn something new every day. But that's been my experience. I've had such a vast array of people believing in me, trusting that I could do the thing, letting me do it when I wasn't really very good, sending me to the right people to help me be better, and then giving me another chance. And, then I came home and I worked on it. And so Anthony Hopkins, I've done a couple of things with Anthony. We did Julie Taymor's Titus, which is a great Shakespeare movie about turn of the century, around 2000, 1999, 2000. Jessica Lange, Alan Cumming, Laura Fraser, all kinds of wonderful people. James Frain, wonderful film. Harry Lennox, and a really marvelous movie led by And that is to say, not just the film was led by, but the company of the film was led by Tony Hopkins. And of course, one could simply go to Tony. We all lived in Rome for 6 months. And you say, Tony, I'm stuck. I've got this shot. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm embarrassed. I've got nothing here. And he would just simply say, well, why don't you try this? Why don't you try that? I would do this. And you think, oh, okay, Tony, you're not kidding me. And I had so many of these experiences when I could say to Clint Eastwood or Sidney Lumet, why do you shoot the rehearsal? How come you're so fast? What is it? Well, you had it in the audition. You sent your audition tape, and I saw that you had the 4 pages of dialogue memorized. So presumably you still know it now. And we rehearsed it. So shoot it. And you think, and he said, besides, after 3 takes, you'll have lost that nervousness and spontaneity that you have in the first one. And I don't want to see you get too good. I need to see it when you're trying to figure it out, right? When you're trying to go, yeah, it's live. And I then took all of that stuff about standing in front of an audience with Shakespeare at my back and saying, okay, I know it's a 50 millimeter lens from 10.5 feet away. That means likely the frame is about this here. And I know that if they're moving that camera, I can do less as they move as I get bigger. And I know how to now tailor that for the machine that is recording this. But the acting is the same as if I'm talking to 2,000 people. Mm-hmm. And now I'm doing this. And so I had these guys to go to and ask questions of and talk to their cinematographers and their crews. Those are the first people I generally make friends with on a film set and say, how are you doing? What are the lenses? What film stock are you using when we were doing that? And so I have never failed to learn something new on every film set, stage play. Wherever I am, I learn something. And they have all been generous mentors and some friends and colleagues for a long, long time.
We've got some questions from the audience and just one more from me, and then we'll see. It flashed and went. Can I see that? Oh, where's that question? There it is. Do you see it, Colm? Are you still asked to audition, or do you just receive offers, Colm?
Absolutely both. I am asked to audition, and I am delighted to audition. I had, as I say, I was talking to Diana LeBlanc, one of my teachers from way back, and who played my mother in Richard III. And she said, you don't still audition, do you? I said, absolutely. I have my phone. I'll put it on a stick. I'll Zoom with my daughter so she can read the lines. I would usually do it with my wife, but my wife's a director, so I had to fire her because she's very particular. And so I would do the scene, I would learn, and I would do the very best. And I usually have an outfit, and I'd done the cinematography, and I worked out whatever I could, taken down all the art on the walls of the house here to just stand up against a blank wall. And then I would look at her, and she just quietly said, well, it was okay. Are you good with that? I said, what's the problem? Well, did you want to be word perfect? Yes, I want to be word perfect. So let's do another. And then finally I said to her, don't look at me. Just you read the lines. I'll look at the little green dot and you look off somewhere else. And then we'll get this through. And then I'll send it off. And finally I had to fire her because she was just too good and she was too demanding. And my daughter is less demanding and she sort of doesn't care. And I'm helping to pay for her education. And so this is helping to pay for her education. And so she helps. So I am happy to audition. Is it humiliations galore? Absolutely. But here's the great advantage. If you audition and they don't want you, and you're pretty sure that they've actually seen you, that they've actually looked at the tape and not, oh my God, we need it tomorrow. And 3 weeks later, you haven't heard. And you go, is this just making the rounds at cocktail parties? Are they just laughing at me? What's going on here? Oh, no, they liked you, but they're going another way. Whatever. The bottom line is, if you know they've seen you and they don't want you, you didn't want to be there, right? You do not want to be there, and you need an opportunity. Why it's, you need an opportunity to be actually seen. Better even than that is to be there in the flesh and meet them and audition for them and see if you would like to work with them, because it's a two-way street, right? They're deciding not if you can act. Most of us can act. That's easy enough. It's, do I want to spend 14 hours a day with this person, slogging through what is going to be difficult, probably under all manner of weather conditions, with limited funds and limited lunchtime, and just get this thing done? Are these people I can and I want to be with? So those are the kinds of questions you're asking yourself in those meetings. And I am only too happy to continue to do that. Am I embarrassed? Yeah. Am I nervous? Yeah. Do I occasionally think, you could have just offered me this? Yes, but this is not some kind of false humility. They deserve a chance to see me try to do the work they actually want me to do. I will have a reputation. I got a resume as long as my arm, and in fact, slightly longer, in 1,000 different things. There isn't much I can't do, but it's still their money, and they have a right to say, yeah, not for me, or absolutely, I'd love that. And so I continue to remain open to the possibility. I debate it with my colleagues and contemporaries who are not interested in doing it. And I say, well, why don't you want to do it? Well, I lack ambition. I just want them to phone me. Or I think I think I deserve that they should just call me. And I've never felt like that. It's never occurred to me. And I think it's a dangerous attitude. It's a dangerous attitude if you're trying to make a living. And, as we talked about earlier, it's harder and harder to do. So in a sense, we have to be more and more willing to be open and vulnerable and available and say, hey, I'll take my chances.
Would you start this from Josh? Would you start your own theater company like Kevin Spacey did?
Kevin Spacey never started his own theater company. Kevin Spacey ran the Old Vic for 11 seasons. And no matter what you think of Kevin Spacey, did a remarkable job of it. And he was fabulous. I saw him play Richard II there, directed by Trevor Nunn, surrounded by English people. And he was amazing. And Moon for the Misbegotten, equally amazing. And then I did 2 seasons of House of Cards, where I, had to say, I thought you were amazing doing that. And I think you're, pretty hot shit. And wow, running a theater company. The answer briefly is no. I couldn't dream of doing it. First of all, I'm not a director. I couldn't direct a 2-car funeral. I know this because I'm married to a director, and I see what actually happens when that gets, created. I am an interpretive artist. I feel my best service is saying, you need blue, red, green, whatever on your palette you call it. I'll be that. I'll be there for that. And I'll execute that, and then I'll step away. And I've learned to then keep my mouth shut. When I've watched good directors in action, they need us to execute. And the quality of my execution is what makes me employable and re-employable. And so I've done, 2 for Sidney Lumet, 2 for John Yu, 2 for so-and-so, John Woo, rather. And I consider that high praise. That they've asked me back means that you do the job. And so, no, a theater company seems to me out of my comfort zone. Anytime I've been directed by actors who are not good directors, and there's a handful who are good directors, but there aren't many. Most of them want you to do it like they would do it, because they look at you and go, and this is what I would do, which is why I know I can't be a director and direct my own company. I just why are you bad? Stop being bad. I mean, it would be better if you were less bad. Well, that's no way to speak to anybody. But I have no other vocabulary and genius to go and say, hey, listen, have you thought about maybe approaching it from this angle or that? I don't know what to say. And when I watch good directors manipulate me, and I know I'm being manipulated, but I know I'm being manipulated into a better performance. Anthony Cymbeline, the artistic director of Stratford here, directed my King Lear. And it was a very successful show. We had a great time doing it. But there was a few moments where he really didn't know what to do with me. And we've worked together a long time. But he just was lost. And then one day I go in and he says something so crystalline, so accurate that I know it wasn't his idea. And I said, you called my wife. You talked to Donna, didn't you? And he blushed. And he was like, well, I said, just tell me what she said. Just tell me what she said. I'll make it like it's yours and I'll execute. And it's at those moments where you realize you just don't have it. Kevin, God bless him, he has it, and he managed it for years and years very successfully. I'm very jealous, but it's an awful lot of work,
Any other questions from Instagram? Do you have a trick to memorizing lines? I think you answered this previously. Are you off book for auditions? Do you know your lines going into an audition? Yeah,
absolutely. I think it's essential that you're off book for an audition, unless they throw something you at the last minute and you go, what? Is it? I will tell you a secret. There was a moment when I was auditioning for Julie Taymor for the Titus, and it was all Shakespeare, right? And we do the scene that I'd prepared, et cetera, et cetera. And then she said, well, what about scene 67? I said, I've never heard about scene 67. What are you talking about? Well, it's here. And, I went, oh, well, my people, that wasn't included in the paperwork you guys sent over. But, well, do you want to go away for 40 minutes or something and have a look at it and come back and maybe give it a try? And I said, well, no, let me hang on. Let me have a look at it. No, let's just give it a try. Do you think I hadn't looked at scene 67? You think I didn't know scene 67? It's the best acting of my career. Pretending I didn't know scene 67, but it hadn't really been on the list, but I had done the work. So that's film and television. Yes, I think it's important that you're off book and ready, because it makes you flexible. So when they say, hey, yeah, that's interesting, could you do it like this? Could you do it like that? You're not worried about the lines. You're worried about the acting or the non-acting, just the thinking, just the being there, just trying to be comfortable and not sweating through your fancy outfit, whatever it is you brought. When it comes to theater, and indeed this applies to film and television as well, but when it comes to theater particularly, I have a lot of big foolscap sheets like these, and they're covered and stuff. And I write the show out. I write the play out, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether there's no one in the mind, and I write the whole thing out in longhand, and sometimes I do it twice. It happens with every movie script. So the downside is I tend to know everybody else's lines too, and I'm impatient when they don't know them, which is, it's obviously, that's not fair. But I find it the best mnemonic exercise to burn those into your brain, because essentially you've made those words your own. To be or not to be, that is the question. Yeah, that's cool. I wrote that. I just wrote that. Whether you know in the minds of things down. Oh, for a muse of fire. Now is the winter of our discontent. May glory some of the sun. Yeah, that makes sense. And you start with this concrete black ink, white page, build this scene in your head. And it's just so much easier to call up at your fingers' ends when you're trying to be flexible and available in a rehearsal process and open to the suggestion and whatever might happen from your fellow players or directors' ideas, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I do. And it seems to help.
Yeah. I used to audition and just sort of read, and then for the past 4 or 5 years, I think it frees you. Oddly enough, paradoxically enough, it just frees you. You're not thinking about the words; you're thinking about other things. So yeah, actors are now doing a lot of self-tapes. How do you feel about self-tapes? Do you prefer self-tapes? I think you said you like being in the room with
I like being in the room, because I think I could ace it in the room, or I'll be sensitive to what the director or the casting director is actually looking for. But so often in these things, you go in and you're auditioning for Spider-Man, you get a piece of paper with lines from another movie that no one is doing, that just don't exist, that have nothing to do with anything else. And there's really not much you can do to invest in that. Then you've got, say, Clint Eastwood. I did Changeling for Clint. I was doing a film, an improvised film in London, England at the time, and he was in LA, and he wasn't meeting actors at all. I said, oh, let me meet him. Let me go and meet him. I'll kill this. I can get this part. He said, he doesn't want to meet you. He doesn't want to meet anyone. He asked the casting directors for the 3 top choices for that part, asked you to put yourself on tape and send it in. That's all he wants. And I went, well, okay, I'll do that. So I learned the 4-page, because I was doing an improvised film, so I was dying to have something that I could memorize. So I learned the 4 or 5 pages of this scene and bought a New York Times at a little, newsstand in London, went in to some casting director, auditioned with this. And I thought, you know what? Screw this. I'm auditioning for Clint Eastwood. He shoots the rehearsal. I'm going to do 1 take. I'm going to do 4 or 5 pages of this. I'm going to do 1 take. I got a plan. That's what I'm going to do. And I got the job. And I suddenly rethought all of my in-person showing up, blah, blah, blah. And when we got to we do the film, we're at the premiere in New York. Angelina Jolie was the star. So Brad Pitt is there. À l'époque, that was who they were together. And Clint and everybody, and Clint's wife at the time, Dina. And so she's talking to me and my wife. So you guys are from London? I went, what? No. Oh, well, your tape came from London. I said, yeah. And then suddenly I understood. He got sent all these tapes. He got into bed with her. They put all the tapes on the thing. He said, put another one in. Put another one. Would you like that guy or that guy? I kind of like that guy. And that's how it worked. And I thought, okay, put yourself on tape, put yourself on the phone, do whatever it takes. If there's a follow-up on Zoom, I have done things for David Fincher trying to get into one of his shows. I did the phone first, then I did the Zoom on the iPad, then I did the Zoom on the computer. Then he said, would you fly to LA? I'll fly myself to LA just to meet him. You bet I will. And so that's what I'm prepared to do.
Any other questions? Maybe
before my battery dies, as I was just looking at my energy saver turned on. I don't know what that means.
Nor do I. Colm, I think. Oh, wait a minute. No, here comes another one. Of all the characters you've played, do you have a favorite?
Probably not. It's like children. You shouldn't really have a favorite child. But I would say, on balance, King Lear is a pretty extraordinary part and one of the best things written in the English language. And so, somebody said he has to plug in. So I'll go and plug this in somewhere. So I would say King Lear is one of my favorites, but I'm no sort of absolutist about this. I've had so much, so many great roles and so much cool stuff that, Hamlet's a pretty good part. Romeo is a pretty good part. Cyrano de Bergerac, Don Juan. I've been very, very lucky. So if I have a favorite, it's Lear, but I don't really have a favorite.
All right. Oh, this from Eliana. How to start off with acting as a teen? I guess she's asking as a young, I think that going back to something we discussed earlier on, you got to get training. You got to get training.
Classes, I think, are enormously useful. So you want movement classes, dance, you want acrobatics or some kind of physical activity that lends you a certain, I'm sorry to be doing all this kind of movie here, but a certain flexibility so that you can be whoever it is the character might be and might become, and that you can adapt and morph into that and take on shapes and all manner of things. So I did improv classes, I did ballet classes, I did movement classes, I did voice classes, I did Alexander classes, which is a kind of a lengthening and lightening and opening up, which helps your breathing, it helps your posture, helps all manner of things, so that you can go into a rehearsal hall with a script and a character and be neutral. That is to say, be available and then discover, what are they telling you? Do you think he's got a hump? Well, it says he has a hump. Okay, well, let's just see how we get to that. Let's see how we get to this. What else? What do they say about him? Who says whatever about it? So I would get as much training and education as I can. Singing classes, voice classes, all very useful because you're standing up in front of people. You're learning public speaking, presentation. You're taking the curse off that. You're getting rid of your nerves because you're replacing just a little old me. I'm not me. I am never me on a stage, ever. I am so boring. I am so not interesting as a person. I got nothing to say. I'm not interesting. Hamlet is interesting. Lear is interesting. My job is to find out why and serve up why and how they're interesting to you so that you can see that they're interesting. So that's the first thing. And if you're doing it as a young person, high school is a great place to do it. Marvin does these remarkable workshops with Shakespeare in the high schools where, in 45 minutes, people who've never been on stage and never acted at all are standing up, acting in front of their classmates, in front of their teachers and assembled, folks from around the school, and then go, oh, I didn't know I could do that. Well, you can, and you just proved you could do it. So maybe you might want to try it again. And so the list of people who've succeeded in Marvin's program and who are still doing this kind of thing or are doing something related to it is legion. So I would just keep doing it. I would find if it's not happening at school, you might try community players, but classes, any kind of training you can get, and read more stuff, watch more shows, and look at the people you admire. Like, whose stuff would you want to steal? I've always wanted to steal from that. So for Tony Hopkins, I stole all of his stuff, right? Lenny Carriou here, I adored him. I stole all of his stuff. And I just follow along. Neil Monroe, I just took the notes and stole all their stuff. Inevitably, it's filtered through you, so it becomes your stuff. And you're passing the baton. We are probably doing things that Henry Irving, one of the great actors of hundreds of years ago, was doing because it's been stolen and passed down through various generations of actors. And we are now, continuing that legacy because it's a very human art that requires communication and face-to-face interaction in order to make it work, either with your colleagues on the stage and then subsequently with an audience. Without that, we're nothing.
Any other? Oh, there's another one. Instagram. If you could redo, well, that's a good question. If you could redo any character or role, which one would that be?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
Well, it's a very good question because you try and leave them without regret, and one of the beautiful things about movies and television is that you do all the work, you do everything you think you can do, you try to put yourself in the right space on the day to make it as good as it can be, but then you also know that the moment they say cut, you relinquish any more responsibility and any control. There's nothing more you can do. And you walk away. They say cut, it's up to them to edit it, and you hope you don't suck, right? And that's always my feeling. As I go away, I say, please make me not suck. In the theater, the responsibility is a lot heavier and it's a lot weightier and it costs a lot more because you're always aware. You're always taking notes. Tonight's performance was okay, but I could have done that. Or I learned something new. The audience responded in this way. I'll put that in tomorrow or in 2 days when I'm doing this again. I have to fix that. I've got to work on that. And that work is never done. Not until you do the last performance. And even as you're doing the last performance, I've had directors who would come on the last performance and give notes. And you said, what on earth are you doing here? What are you talking about? And then they very wisely say, well, you might do it again. And I've played a lot of things twice. Richard III, I've played Cassius twice. I've played Petruchio twice. I've played some of these plays 3 times. And I always learn, and I'm at a different place in my life. So what I know about life and what I know about Shakespeare, what I know about these plays is always slightly different and evolves. And so consequently, you never fail to learn something. So, but I try to leave them on the last day of a play, for example, not like the movies cut, forget it, goodbye, wipe the slate like an Apple thing, put it in the trash, goodbye. I go, I'm going to put that to bed for a while, and I'll come back to it and see were there any other new ideas. If I'm going to do it again, or is this the last kick at this can, what will I do? There is nothing I've done that I would redo. There are, of course, things I could have been better at, right? So I played Richard III in 1988, and I was 30 years old. And I was cocky, I was arrogant and energetic. I was also playing Petruchio in the Taming of the Shrew at the same time, and Athos in the Three Musketeers, all at the same time. I had no problem with that and loved it. But, I might have mistaken enthusiasm for accuracy and, a willingness to engage for any real weight. Cut to 2022, and I'm asked to play Richard III again. Now, Richard III, at my age, had been dead for 32 years. So needless to say, there was no wig or rouge or rubber nose that was going to fix this. I was just going to be an old guy doing this. And I chose to use the physicality that I discovered in 1988 because it was very effective, I thought. And I chose to use a lot of what I learned in 88 and then moved on completely to everything else I knew. And so suddenly all of that youthful enthusiasm and energy was refined into something very much more dangerous and much more specific. And I said to the company, I said, listen, guys, I want you to know, anybody has any questions for me about what I'm doing, I am an open book. If you think what I'm doing is weird or peculiar or whatever, just ask me about it. I will tell you why. But understand, everything I am doing is planned. I've worked on this. I've thought about this. I'm exploring this. I'm not sure about this, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm going to try this. If you have any issues with this, just ask me. And the model I took was Glenn Gould and his two recordings of the Goldberg Variations, one in 1955 when he was first starting his career, and one in 1980 for which he won the posthumous Grammy. Of course, he died at 50, just before this thing came out. And I thought, listening to these two pieces of music, the youthful exuberance, the clarity, the precision, the absolute drama and drive that he put into this, X number of years later, was delicately refined to exactly the notes in the order in which they came through the mind and heart of an artist. And I thought, there's something in that. I'm going to try to do that. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's how a working, evolving actor continues to hopefully work and evolve.
Which actors, movies, or series would you like to work with or on?
Oh, I don't know. My gosh, I'm so lucky at the moment. I'm working with Andy Garcia, Billy Bob Thornton, Demi Moore, Ali Larder, Sam Elliott in Landman 2. We finished that. They are all amazing. I don't know. What would I like to do? I would like to be in more Taylor Sheridan shows. Please tell Taylor. I could do Leontes. I could do a 19, 23, 83, 43, whatever you need. But, there's a lot of great shows out there. I'd love to do a drop-by in Slow Horses with, the great Gary Oldman. And, there's a handful of things I would love to just show up on in disguise. I mean, I would like to be, I know this sounds ridiculous, but I would like to just be heavily disguised in the show and not have anybody know it was me. It's a mustache, a beard, glasses, goggles, whatever, rubber head. And I've done a lot of that. I suppose most of you won't know that I was the Laufey, the frost giant king in the original Thor, directed by Kenny Branagh, because he's 9.5 feet tall and blue. It's easy to mistake the two of us. But bottom line, I'm still open to all kinds of possibilities. And listen, if there's any work out there and you know of it, you know where to find me.
Are there any films? Oh, okay, that's the same question. Any films? Yeah, same question.
Well, when you see something really, really good, right? And the ones that I tend to see when Robert Redford passed, as I said earlier, he'd been very charming and gracious with me. So I felt obligated to sit down and watch All the President's Men that night, and just thought not only very fondly of him and how gracious and kind he was, but how remarkable all these guys are. The actors, Hal Holbrook, Ned Beatty, everybody being simply remarkable. You turn on the TV and there's The Verdict. The Verdict is a spectacular movie. And Paul Newman is unbelievably good. Charlotte Rampling. Then Network comes on, and I just want to give my Screen Actors Guild card and my equity card back. I go, I'm not worthy. I can't act. I don't know anything. These people are amazing. And so you think, gosh, I'd like to be one of those things. I will be in utter candor where I saw myself, where I would like to be at some point before I die. The Vanity Fair Oscars version, right? That comes out with all these glossy pictures. There's always a fold-out picture of the supporting actors. And it's Chris Cooper and Dylan Baker and all of these guys. And I thought, I want to be one of those guys. I want to be one of those guys because that's where my skill set really is. Because I can be chameleon-esque. I can do all kinds of things, but you just got to believe that I can, and you got to hire me, and you got to let me try it. So that remains an ambition.
Another question comment from Josh. Even though he's a legendary actor, is there any pressure from agents and producers to put out social media content to build on online brand that could reach younger audiences?
Very good question. I asked them that myself. Their conclusion was I was simply too old. That the bottom line, and as you can see, there's one place where I have like 580,000 followers, and it's not me, but it was built after the Umbrella Academy, and Sir Reginald Hargreaves was getting some traction. Now, I suppose if I had the stamina, I could have got on and started doing all that myself and posting whatever the Netflix would allow me to post and keeping up as part of their PR machinery, and hopefully doing myself some good at the same time. You specifically in that question asked to appeal to a younger audience. My feeling is I've already done that. Umbrella Academy appeals to a younger audience. They just don't know who I am. They don't know it's me, but it doesn't matter. The people who hire me know who it is, right? And so that's what I'm more interested in. If I go around trying to curry favor with a young audience I've never met, and can't really speak to and address immediately personally as I can in high schools when I go in with Marvin. And part of my interest is I'll go in and say, hey, I did Thor. I did Umbrella Academy. You've seen these things. Now let's talk about Shakespeare. Right? I've always felt that would be a calling card for the next thing we want to talk about. Has that limited me in some way in my career development and growth? Very possibly. Very possibly. But when I went to my manager and agent and I said, guys, do you think there's a lot of value in my working at this and posting pictures of my breakfast and whatever else people have to do? And they said, if you were a young person, if you were like a newer actor and you didn't have 350 credits in film and television and 80, 90, 100 credits in the theater, most of them classical theater, etc., then maybe it would help. But under the circumstances, it's not going to convince anybody that you can or can't act. So it's not going to be really worthwhile. So look at your amount of time investment and techno investment and all of that. I know people who hire other people to do it, but inevitably it looks like other people did it. Mm-hmm. And so I have not done it thus far. I'm not on Facebook. I have an Instagram account with 2 pictures on it. My anniversary, my wedding day, and my 25th anniversary. That was 7 years ago or 6 years ago. So I haven't really been very active. I'm hoping that the work speaks for itself. I mean, I'm getting Instagram posts of scenes I did for Landman and all sorts of other shows. I go, well, somebody's putting this stuff up. So I think I'm probably not going to do that unless somebody changes my mind.
Dave M, really enjoying this. Thank you both. Hope there is a replay. As I missed, yes, you can go to eBoss, and this interview will be up there. I think as early as tomorrow. Charlene can correct me if I'm wrong on that. Any other questions from the audience before we wrap things up? Going once, going twice. I just want to. If you could turn back time, what would you do differently in your career?
Again, that's a very good question. And, I'm trying very hard to be happy with where I am and recognize the blessings and the good fortune that I've had in a career that has spanned decades, but also all manner and different kinds of work, blockbusters here, every country in the world, megastars, knights and lords of the realm, ladies, dames, you name it, all sorts of remarkable people who become, colleagues, mentors, and friends, and have guided me along the path. And, I sit here quietly and think, well, on balance, this is actually pretty awesome. My worry about changing anything in the timeline is that, you pull out that one Jenga block or that one card in the structure and it would go another way. And I'm sort of terrified about that. I'm terrified that I would have missed the sorts of opportunities that I've had, because the ones that have been foundational, like playing Coriolanus, Hamlet, Lear, Macbeth, Romeo, Petruchio, Iago, Iachimo, Claudio, you name it, Cyrano, Don Juan, those things I wouldn't have missed for the world. And they became, at the times that they came into my life, absolutely foundational for the next thing. So when I get on a set with Tony Hopkins and Kenny Branagh, and he's got moments to explain what he wants, and he's talking, 250 crew members, $250 million, we've got to get on with it. He talks to me and Tony Hopkins in Shakespearean shorthand. And he says, hey, Tony, it's King Lear here, that column, Winter's Tale, second act, where he goes mad and does it. So you two, ready, now, action. And we both knew precisely what he was talking about. But we're dredging up stuff that we both did 30 years ago. And we know exactly where we are. We know exactly what he wants. And we're both thinking, well, I'm glad I did that. That was helpful. And, people around us, there was a moment in Chronicles of Riddick where the cinematographer, brilliant Irish cinematographer, was walking by, and me and Linus Roach, who played one of my brilliant henchman lieutenants, we were talking about where we were from and what we'd done. He'd done the RSC, I'd done Stratford. We said, you done Richard? I said, Richard III. You doing Richard II? And then we got to parts we both played, like Hamlet. And we launched in to a Hamlet soliloquy together in chorus, all dressed up in $10,000 worth of fancy steel and Chronicles of Riddick headgear and what nonsense, the whole, kit and caboodle. And we just did it to amuse ourselves and no one else. To be or not to be, that's the question, blah, 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 blah. We got to the end of it. And it was the nicest thing I thought anybody ever said to us. Cinematographer passes by and goes, real actors. And I was so touched. I thought, oh, you think so? Well, I've got more. I've got lots more. But of course, that wasn't the point. The point was we were feeling each other out, and we were using a common vocabulary with which to do it. And those Shakespearean building blocks of how we became the artists we are now. And so I have to sit here, in conversation with you and think, well, if you've asked me in conversation to be with you, it must be okay. There must be something to talk about. So I don't think I'd change anything.
Hear, hear. We love you. An Instagram that's not me, Colm. I'm not saying that I'm reading.
That's
We
okay,
love you.
Marvin.
Canada
Love to
loves
hear
you.
you.
It's so educational. Thank you. You inspire me. You inspire us all. That's an Instagram comment, anonymous. We don't know who is saying that. Anything else, or was that our last one? Because I do want to end with a story. For the last, I told you we were going to go over for the last almost 2 hours. Colm, I might embarrass you here, so if you want to go and see if that person's still at the door. But for 2 hours we've been talking about Colm's career, and it has been a spectacular career. But let me tell you about Colm the human being. He has very kindly alluded to Shakespearean's performing arts, which for 28 years has been getting into high schools all over Ontario and the UK and the US. As I said earlier on, we were in New York last December with members of Kenneth Branagh's King Lear company doing workshops there. I could get you the exact date. It had to be 25 years ago, very shortly after we started, that Richard Azunian, the drama critic for the Toronto Star, I reached out to him. I said, we're doing these Shakespeare workshops. Colm Feore. I said, Colm, would you come and do me a favor? Would you come and be a guest artist? Colm said, sure. When do you want? I'm going to a school December 8th. Is that going to work for you? First thing in the morning. It's kind of early. I'll be coming in from Stratford. Oh, we can find another date. That's fine. Whatever date the school wants me, that's when I'll be there, says Colm. And it was December, right? So I call up Azunian. We're done. Colm's coming in December 8th. We're going to look at King Lear, ironically enough, which has been mentioned so often here tonight. And I wake up on the morning of December 8th, 2004, 2005, raging snowstorm. Now, this is a school who had undergone a tragedy. One of their students was very sadly killed in an incident on Yonge Street, just weeks before we appeared there. And it was just breaking my heart that we're going to disappoint these people. I was living in Toronto, so it took me like an hour and a half to get the 10 kilometers. And I'm thinking, what am I going to say to the contact teacher? Colm, he's got to come from Stratford. So I go there, and about a half hour early, Colm was already there. Colm was already there. He did not let me down, and he has not let me down on the multiple occasions that I have asked him to come and do Shakespeareans a favor. He continues to amaze and astound me. And we just want to thank you for being here tonight, sharing your time, your stories, your expertise. Your career is a testament to the power of Canadian talent on stages all over the world. And on behalf of Entertainment 411 and eBoss Canada, we are so grateful for the time you carved out to be with us here tonight and for the cultural legacy you have established. It's been a privilege having you here, my friend. My name is Marvin Caron. Thank you for watching Entertainment 411. Colm, I bid you a fond good night, and we will see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure. Cheers.